After playing this game, I can tell you one thing. Mode 7 was a mistake.
Big tackle.
Usually, this logo gets you excited for a quality gaming experience, but not this time around. Konami's NFL Football is quite simply one of the worst football games I have ever played.
Back to pass. He fires it. Nice catch.
And you know, that is really saying something. I mean, this game sucks at everything. Like, it's impossible to pass, the graphics are really, really bad, you can't play defense, and the controls make no sense at all. But the worst part of all, the thing that really pisses me off about this game, is those stupid Mode 7 graphics. It's all over the place. I hate this game. The biggest problem, of course, is the ridiculous way the screen rotates, which means that you never know which direction you're supposed to go.
Big tackle.
The frame rate is atrocious, and the controls are extremely delayed, making running almost impossible. The graphics make no sense. Incomplete passes magically turn into completions.
He rifles it. He's got it.
Nothing you do on defense makes a difference at all.
Back to pass. He fires it. Nice catch.
And when you figure out how to high step when running, your guy looks like he needs to use the bathroom.
First down.
This is an absolutely awful abomination of a football video game. It's one of the worst football video games I've ever played. But the funny thing is that it's almost certainly not the worst football game of 1993. In fact, I'm not even sure if it's the worst Super Nintendo football game of 1993. Anyway, let's dig in. Konami, of course, was famous for great arcade-style games, you know, like the original Castlevania series. In the early 1990s, Konami's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a major hit at the arcades. I remember spending tons of money on this one. And of course, the famous Simpsons arcade game was another unforgettable Konami classic. So that's the reason why you and I automatically think of quality as soon as we see the name Konami. We're used to seeing the Konami games that were well programmed and well thought through. But notice that I didn't mention any sports games. That's because Konami had kind of an uneven record of sports games leading up to NFL football. I mean, the first Double Dribble arcade game wasn't awful, I guess. This is the one where you have to push the button to dribble the ball and you get called for all sorts of stupid fouls. The NES game was an all-time classic with the corner three-pointers. The Blades of Steel arcade game was also an all-time classic if you were lucky enough to play it.
They're going at each other. Hey, pretty face. Hey, you're brain damaged. Kick his butt.
And of course, the Blades of Steel NES game is much better known. Now, both the NES ports of Double Dribble and Blades of Steel were originally Famicom Disk System games over in Japan. And I bring this up because there was another Konami sports game for the FDS that never came out in North America. And this one was awful. This is Exciting Baseball, almost certainly one of the worst 8-bit baseball games ever made. Actually, the pitcher-batter matchup isn't horrible. When you hit the ball, however, you'll be greeted with this horrible frame rate and some of the worst controls in the history of sports video games. The frame rate alone looks kind of like NFL football, and it's honestly a good thing this game never escaped Japan. Exciting Baseball is just a pain to play. I really hate this game. Anyway, from what I can tell, Konami had 2 more shots at sports games in North America, and both of these games really suck. The first was Bottom of the Ninth, an arcade game that is simply awful. Again, the batter-pitcher matchup isn't that bad, but the fielding views are just horrible.
Oh, it's an error. You're out.
Seriously, can you believe that this was an arcade game?
You're out.
Anyway, the other crappy game was Base Wars for the NES, and I know that some of you will hate me for ragging on this one. Yeah, I know you can buy like weapons or whatever, this game still sucks. The game skips frames like there's no tomorrow, and it forces you into these stupid fights all the time. Anyway, Konami didn't exactly have a great track record of making, you know, good or playable sports games. And so in the build-up to the Super Nintendo, Konami decided to do what every other major video game company was doing at the time. It found a subcontractor to make its new game. And the company that it chose was Park Place Productions. If you were an adult in the early 1990s, you likely had heard of the company because of this program, Dvorak on Typing. Though it was published by Interplay, it was actually programmed by Park Place Productions, and even the discs had the Park Place Productions name on them. But that typing thing, that was not really what Park Place Productions was most famous for. Nah, Park Place was the company behind the John Madden football game on the Sega Genesis. You know, the original one that came out in 1990? That's the one that started the modern era of football video games. So yeah, this company was kind of a big deal. Even though the game itself only says Electronic Arts, the developers were actually Park Place Productions. You have to look closely at the cartridge to see it, by Park Place and John Madden. Park Place was also the studio that created the original NHL hockey on the Sega Genesis. So in other words, the company had some clout. In fact, by 1993, Park Place Productions was a very large software company and was trying to balance service contracts from numerous companies at the same time. And that company did what any fledgling development studio would have done in its place. It expanded as quickly as it possibly could. And so it's not hard to find old advertisements like this one in the newspapers from Northern California. Note this bit here about fierce deadlines that require highly motivated self-learners. By August 1993, newspapers were printing articles about Park Place bursting into the 3D development scene, competing, in theory, with major Hollywood studios. But the problem is that the company was an absolute mess, and it's obvious when you look back. The games that Park Place Productions came out with in 1993 were just not good, and these games were released way behind schedule. So for example, NFL football on the Super NES was originally previewed in GamePro back in January 1993. The article promised that there would be tons of Mode 7 action, which I think is more a threat than a promise. 4 months later, in April 1993, GamePro had to remind its readers that NFL football was indeed coming out on the Super Nintendo and that it had not been totally abandoned. But it wasn't until September 1993 that the game finally came out, a full 9 months later than originally promised. And seriously? I mean, what were they doing for 9 months? The game is barely playable. It's an abomination. It just sucks. I mean, I get dizzy just thinking about this game.
Back to pass. Incomplete.
No matter what you do, the screen is going to spin around and around.
Back to pass.
And I swear, that was not a catch.
Nice catch.
Now, as you probably already know, Mode 7 was all the rage on the Super Nintendo way back when. So remember, this was the days of Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Nintendo wanted companies to use the full hardware capabilities of the Super Nintendo to try to compete with Sega, because Sega didn't have Mode 7, right? Now, some of the companies were tasteful with those Mode 7 effects, and others not so much. For example, Madden 94 on the Super NES has the screen turnaround when the possession changes. That's a huge step up from the Genesis version, where the screen abruptly changes from one direction to the other. And there's also this interesting graphical scrolling effect, which I think is Mode 7, though I'm not 100% sure. The thing is that Madden 94 made sparing use of Mode 7. It only used it when it made sense, not like all over the place. But other games were programmed a little bit differently. Pilot Wings is an excellent example of doing Mode 7 the right way. This feels like it's actually made in 3D, and it is stable and easy to control. Plus, the graphics actually look really good. F-Zero, of course, is the most famous example of Mode 7 in an early Super NES game. It might not look like much today, but believe me, this game was revolutionary back when it first came out. Now, using Mode 7 heavily makes sense in a few types of games, mostly stuff like racing games, you know, where that over-the-shoulder perspective actually makes sense. But there were some companies that were a little bit more aggressive when it came to using this technique. For example, NCAA basketball, created by Sculptured Software, was created entirely in Mode 7. The game is extremely disorienting, and this is really hard to play. Now, I don't know about you guys, but this game makes me feel sick to my stomach. The biggest problem is that there's no solid point of reference since the stupid camera keeps moving around. Now, NCAA basketball was actually originally a Japanese game. It was imported and it was modified a little bit by Sculptured Software before Nintendo published it. But then Sculptured Software developed its own game. This was a hockey game that was totally notorious. This has got to be one of the worst hockey games ever created. I mean, the camera angle just keeps changing and changing. The problem is that the camera is focused on the puck, which means you'll never know if you're supposed to go left, right, down, or up. I seriously don't understand how this game got through basic quality control. So my guess is that nobody was playtesting any of this garbage. I mean, Nintendo wanted to show off Mode 7, right? So just make Mode 7 games, right? Stop thinking about it, stupid. Anyway, Park Place Productions didn't quite go to that extreme with NFL football, but it was pretty close. I mean, once you get to know the controls, you can peel off really nice runs like this. It would be nice if I could actually see in front of me, however. As you can see though, the horrible frame rate doesn't get better no matter what you do. The crowd looks like garbage and the cheerleaders just totally suck. And we all know that cheerleaders are the most important part of these games, right? Anyway, this game was really bad and everybody knew it even back then. In fact, some of these reviews are really funny in hindsight. GamePro talks about how crappy the graphics are in the first paragraph of the review. So here it says, the game's problem is the game screen, which is in constant motion. I mean, it's like poetry to my ears. They conclude that it would have been better to cut out the stupid graphical tricks and just keep the plays at one angle. And yet, in the end, GamePro gave the game a 4.5 for graphics out of 5 and a 5 for sound, like a perfect score for sound. So I've said it before, I'll say it again, GamePro was more than happy to exchange its ratings for money. There's no way that was the real rating for this game. The entire review was about how much the graphics suck, and it got a score like that? It's a joke. Anyway, the funniest review is the one from Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power was understandably sensitive about sports games since the Super Nintendo sports games up to this time totally sucked. And so, starting in January 1993, Nintendo Power started publishing these sports scene features every 3 months or so. They were trying to let people know that the Super Nintendo did have sports games. Oh, and look down here, we've got a preview of NFL football featuring Mode 7 rotation. And so you can imagine how important a game like this was for Nintendo. I mean, Konami was a huge name at the time. The biggest problem the Super Nintendo had with sports games was that all of the games that were on the Super NES were also on the Genesis, and the Genesis games were just strictly better. The review came out in May 1993, which is something like 5 months before the game was actually released. And they started off the review talking about how the Mode 7 effects made the reviewers want to throw up. They complained about the menu screen and long animations. These are two things that I'm pretty sure were changed before the game had the official release. But the nice thing is that the computer does most of the playing for you, so you can still score touchdowns despite the horrible controls and impossible play view. In the end, NFL football had horrible ratings, even worse than the awful Football Fury by American Sammy. See, that's the reason why we loved Nintendo Power when we were kids, is because the magazines would actually tell you the truth about these games. So personally, I really wanted to play this game when I was a kid since the colors of the screenshots look so vibrant. I didn't even read the stupid article, right? Well, now that I've played it, I can tell you that I really wish that I hadn't. I'll never get this game out of my mind. It will be burned in my memory forever. But there's one thing that's even worse. To keep the game relevant, Nintendo Power mentioned it again in its September 1993 issue, which just so happens to be when the game was actually released. The rules of this contest were pretty simple. If you could beat Team Konami with the Seattle Seahawks and send in proof, you would be eligible for a grand prize trip for 2 to the 1994 Pro Bowl. And in all honesty, this would have been a pretty cool prize to win. The problem is that was just impossible. Here, I'll show you. Okay, so first you gotta put in the password, and it's like 25 freaking characters long, so it takes forever. Then you get to this ugly screen where you realize that the Seahawks don't stand a chance against the Konami All-Star team. Now, if you're lucky, you'll guess right and you'll be able to stop them on first down, though the graphics still make no sense.
Gives it to the fullback. Big tackle.
However, even if you guess right, chances are that the computer will throw for a first down right over your head anyway, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Got it. First down.
And this game is set to 15-minute quarters, which means it's going to take you forever to get to the end. Seriously, they should give you a prize for playing a full 60-minute game of this garbage. I mean, it's got to take at least a half hour per quarter because of all the stupid clock stoppages. With the Mode 7 effects, I'm lucky if I can play this game for even 10 minutes at a time before I feel dizzy and have to go lie down. This is the ultimate 16-bit gaming challenge. Anyway, if you're lucky, the computer will call a flea flicker and will throw an interception.
He fires it. Interception.
and now's your big chance for an offensive play. Nintendo Power tells us that we should run the 4-7 sweep, except go to the other direction to fool them. When I try that, I run into an unblocked defender and can do nothing about it.
Gives it to the fullback. Big tackle.
Nintendo Power then tells me to choose a deep out route from the shotgun when passing. This has got to be the worst passing mode in football game history, and of course, I can't complete a single pass.
Going deep. Incomplete.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, isn't it? Your players are awful, your plays do nothing, you can't complete a single pass, the game just keeps spinning around and around until you get sick. This is a horrible game. But the funny thing is that it's probably not the worst football game of 1993, let alone the worst of all time. So I've seen some idiots on YouTube who claim that Capcom's football game is the worst ever. This game is actually really good, and it plays a lot more smoothly than the early Madden games on Super Nintendo. No, if you're talking about a bad 1993 football game, look no further than Joe Montana Football for the Sega CD. I swear, this game is considered torture under the Geneva Convention. Anyway, Konami's NFL football game is bad, but at least it's better than that Sega CD garbage. Now, the hidden story behind this is what happened to Park Place Productions, and this is the part where it becomes really infuriating. The mainstream media kept reporting on the positive things that Park Place was doing through the end of 1993. You know, stuff like working on ESPN's Baseball Tonight, which is another frustrating game. Actually, the truth is that Park Place Productions had totally overstretched itself and wound up with a bunch of projects that went unfinished. The most notable failure was NFL Quarterback Club. This was a game that Park Place was going to make for Acclaim but never actually finished. The Game Boy version was released first under that famous LJN Rainbow. And you have to remember that LJN was a subsidiary of Acclaim at that time. Yeah, I know, the AVGN and stuff, they never talk about this part. So basically, Acclaim took all the bad games that were going to come out and they put them under the LJN brand, since Acclaim was supposed to be the brand that was like part of Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, all the good games, right? But what happened next to Park Place Productions is really, really sad. In late December 1993, after Park Place had missed a lot of deadlines, Sony ImageSoft showed up and promised to give jobs to Park Place developers then and there. There were 30 or so developers that switched companies right away, making it almost impossible for Park Place to compete. Park Place ran into a classic problem. It took on more contracts than it could handle, and it couldn't train employees up fast enough to keep up. And honestly, the last straw was the threat of the ESPN baseball game being significantly delayed, which would have been absolutely horrible. Park Place tried to stay in business, but it was all over but the shouting. There was a $390 million lawsuit filed in 1997, but Park Place did not have the money to keep up the fight, and it quietly disappeared afterwards. That's a really sad way for things to end, and honestly, it makes me feel very frustrated with Sony. But at the same time, Park Place really had it coming to them. The company made the first Madden game, sure, the first NHL game, Monday Night Football for the PC, and then NFL football for the Super NES, and it was also supposed to do this quarterback club thing. I mean, the quality just went downhill quickly, and the games all wound up totally sucking in the end. As usual, quality is much more important than quantity. Anyway, as sad and unfair as the demise of Park Place Productions is, you have to admit that this game totally sucks.
Incomplete.
It's kind of hard for me to feel bad for the company after playing this piece of garbage.
Red 52. Green 42. Hut. Back to pass. Incomplete.
Even kicking the freaking extra point makes me want to projectile vomit all over the floor. Anyway, this game just totally sucks. Do not play it. If you own it, sell it, or better yet, bash it with a hammer or something like that so we never have to look at it again. Stay away from this game, trust me.